Hello, Bill.
Good morning, Matt.
Welcome to the DMZ, everybody.
DMZ back in effect. Wednesday morning, February 26th. So we're a little past the 1 month point of this
The hostage
latest.
crisis known as the Trump presidency.
Yeah, we all are hostages in this nightmare.
I feel like I'm Rush Limbaugh. Day 31 of the hostage crisis known as the Trump presidency. Bill, you had a provocative piece this week in Washington Monthly, which is why I wanted to invite you on. Some may say it offers a glimmer of hope and optimism. Others may say you're back to naivete and wish casting. But either way, we can have a hell of a discussion about it. Why don't you tell us about the piece, and then I will attempt to poke holes in it.
Well, sure. I haven't looked back again at the poll averages in the last 24 hours. I could look at it again, see if something else scrapped up. When I wrote the piece, it published yesterday morning. In the Real Clear Politics and 538 job approval averages, Trump had started the presidency at about an 8-point net approve over disapprove, which is better than he had ever done before. He started the first presidency just barely above water for a couple of days, then went underwater pretty quickly and never came back up, and lost. So he's even cracking 50% in a good number of polls to start, which is also unusual for him. And so you had a lot of Trump more popular than ever headlines, which kind of obscures the fact that it's still pretty low for the beginning of a presidency. And then over the course of the first month, it's gone down. The averages have gone down by about 7 points, where now he's just barely above water. And if you're looking back at, we don't have a lot of granular poll data when you go 100 years back or so, but for the presidents that we do have, they all generally start much, much higher. And they don't, some presidencies start rockier than others. Bill Clinton, went underwater fairly quickly in May of his first year, but he was still holding on pretty strong by the end of February. So to be treading water by February is historically bad. I mean, even just to use common sense, you don't have a lot of examples of other presidents that are really having a lot of rocky times in their first month. It doesn't so much matter for Trump, because we know he doesn't really care about public opinion, and he doesn't trim his sails agenda-wise depending on his poll numbers. He asserts high poll numbers regardless of what the actual data is. But if you're a congressional Republican and you have to be on the ballot in 2026, these things should grab your attention. There's reason to believe that this is not just statistical noise, that it's gone down because Trump is doing a lot of things that are not popular. We have other poll data to show that Elon Musk is not popular, firing workers is not popular, tariffs are not popular. So if you're a Republican running for office in 2026, you guys are asking yourself, do I keep acting like a cult follower, or do I start putting some distance between myself and this guy because he's dead weight?
All right, so I got a bunch of questions. Let me start with this one. Voters knew what they were getting. Heritage Foundation put out this Project 25. Trump said he wasn't, but it was obvious this was the roadmap for Trump. Trump said he wanted to do terror. Anybody who's been paying attention knew. I think Trump is governing as advertised, actually. He's doing pretty much what I thought he would do, which would be more dangerous than the first term. You're suggesting that people are surprised and they're not happy, but he's giving them pretty much what you should have expected from him, right?
Well, if you pay attention, sure. How many times we have to go through this? George W. Bush was pretty explicit about what he wanted to do to Social Security in the campaign, and then he did try to do it, and it blew up in his face.
Oh, I disagree. I disagree. I don't think anybody who was sort of just watching that election, um, that was certainly not the priority or the point of the reelection by any stretch. It might have been.
This is the exact point here. Trump said all sorts of things over the course of the campaign, so you can go back and say, hey, I promised to do X and I'm just doing it. It doesn't mean the average person was carrying around all 100 things that he talked about. All the dominating evidence is, as far as the swing is concerned, they voted for Trump because they thought he would lower their prices and their cost of living. And of all the 1,000 things that he's done in the past month, not one has been on that subject. In fact, it's gone the opposite direction with tariffs. Time and time again, presidents overread their mandates. This is probably the most extreme example in history. And again, if you're a Republican running for office, you want to say, hey, he told you he was going to do it. Shut the F up. Like, that's not a 2026 message. People expected lower prices. They're not getting them. And there's no reason to believe they're going to get them. They might get a tax cut. I don't, and you might try to argue, hey, he did that for you. He gave you some extra money. But just as Joe Biden would say, hey, I got you infrastructure. I got you more affordable health care. If your prices go up, it eats away at the things that you got. So getting a tax cut and prices are still elevated, that people aren't going to be impressed with you.
But Trump might be even more explicit with this. I mean, Elon Musk has talked about sending every American a $5,000 Dodge check, which, again, grant you, that in and of itself would probably spur inflation, never mind the tariffs.
Yes.
But I think if people get a check in the mail from Trump, they're going to feel happy about it.
For initially, but if you're out on election day, I mean, we've just gone through this. Inflation affects everybody. You cannot escape inflation. You go to the store, you see the prices, no matter where you are in the income ladder, you feel it. So if you're getting something in one hand, it's being taken away from another. That I don't think that's going to get you where you want to go.
If Biden had sent every American a check for $2,500 in October, I don't know, maybe it would have helped. Second question, or whatever number we're on, question. Do we even believe the polls? I mean, you're citing poll numbers. Do polls even matter anymore? Do we trust the polls? You know where I'm going with that.
Well, I'm not going to argue with you that I can take a poll average and say this is precisely where we are right now, and there's no room for error. I mean, there's an inherent margin of error in the polls, but we can see trajectories. We can see a 7-point drop over the course of the month, along lines with other poll data saying, here are all the things Trump is doing. Do you like it? And many people saying, no, we don't. That data, fits. I mean, there's some Occam's razor here that, again, we just had a University of Michigan consumer sentiment poll, consumer sentiment down by 10 points, and people expressing fears about further inflation. We are not Trump. One of the things that Trump promised was immediate relief on prices, which of course is obviously ludicrous, but he did say it. So you're talking about, well, he said this, he said that too. And people are not getting help there. So it stands to reason they would be frustrated.
Well, he said on day one, the Ukraine war would end and prices would immediately come down. The seas would heal themselves. Wait, that was Obama. But he also talked about, not taxing tips and things like that. I don't even think that's part of the Republican plan anymore. Am I right?
Well, I mean, they got to write the reconciliation bill still, so
Okay.
that could very well end up being in there. I expect a reconciliation bill will pass. I mean, I can't say for absolute certainty. It only takes a few Republicans to break ranks for it to not pass. But I have no great hope that there's going to be true resistance there. So I would, expect. I mean, and even if they cratered on their initial pass, like they did last time, they cratered on reconciliation to repeal Obamacare. They recovered to cut taxes. Republicans will
Yeah.
cut taxes. So whether the tips thing's in there or not, I don't know, but I would imagine it would be. Why not? What would stop them from doing it? So I think they will get that much. They passed tax cuts at the end of 2017. They still lost the House in 2018. So it's not like that is an automatic political winner. We've seen this before.
You mentioned Elon Musk and his growing unpopularity. I mean, if you were casting a villain, he would be a pretty good one. But isn't it possible that Musk serves as a lightning rod, that he actually uh, can do a whole bunch of bad things that, Trump doesn't want to get his hands dirty. Elon does them for the first 6 months, and then Trump can get rid of him and blame Elon. And Trump sort of, if the czar only knew what Elon was up to, that sort of thing.
If there's plenty of time in history. Look, Obamacare was initially unpopular, led to a bad 2010 midterm, but Obama recovered by 2012. The economy, started to get better. And by 2018, Obamacare was popular and was used against Republicans for them trying to repeal it. So a politician can't just look at the poll numbers today, and they got to think a few steps ahead. What in the history of Donald Trump in office would make one believe that he's just doing some of the tough stuff now and it's all going to be really well executed in the future, and I'll feel good about how he's managing the government by 2026? Everything we know about Trump is total inattention to detail, putting people. I mean, the only reason why things weren't even worse in the first term was that there are some people who hung around who actually knew how to run a government. Those people are around now. It's all insane MAGA cultists. I mean, if you are, I would argue there are a few things you got to do right to not get yourself in trouble. You got to have a good counterterrorism team. You got to have a good natural disaster response team. You got to have a good public health team, and you got to take inflation seriously. Everyone who is put into these positions are crackpots. There's nobody there you would say, I really feel comfortable that this person understands how to manage a government, manage a workforce. So if I'm a clear-eyed Republican, I just would not feel good about how this looks 18 months from now. I would have no trust in these people to manage things properly.
Well, let me ask you, about speaking of Republicans. I mean, I have no sense that they could break from Trump at this point. I mean, Republicans have been so loyal to him, so intimidated by him. And so instead of them breaking and trying to save themselves politically, I think it's more likely you have some weird hostage situation where some of them try to slightly distance from him, but not too much, because if you angered Trump, then he will be mean to you or attack you on Twitter, and you could lose your base and maybe lose a primary. So they're really squeezed, I would say. Trump isn't going to give them a leeway, a hall pass to say or do what they have to do to survive. But let me ask you this, Bill. If you were advising Republicans, if you were a strategist in a swing district, what do you tell your member? How do they pull off this maneuver?
I appreciate the political squeeze that they're in. I mean, the threat, if you're a Republican, the threat from Trump is a primary challenge. It's not so much a general election. So how do you survive the primary so you can be more in the middle for the general? And I don't have, a magic answer to that. I mean, because their hand is going to be forced on budget reconciliation very soon. If you don't want to have a giant Medicaid cut, which is almost surely going to be in there, and it's going to negatively affect people in your district in an immediate way, you gotta bite that bullet now and vote no on that, and have a little bit of faith that even some of the diehard MAGA people aren't going to be happy with it, because some of them get that money, and won't punish you for that vote come primary. Uh, uh, I- we there's every reason to believe that Republicans will lose seats in a midterm. I mean, that's the normal state of affairs. Even in a modestly well-run presidential administration, you have pendulum swings, and the party in power loses at least a handful of seats. And this looks like it's potentially going to be worse than that. So surviving the primary is only useful to the extent it's going to help you win the general. Win the general is the end. If you want your seat, I mean, look, if these people are willing to lose their seats because they're going to get some other kind of government job or lobbyist job in the Republican fold afterwards, then hey, go down in flames. But if you're trying to keep your seat, you got to break ranks probably pretty soon.
You just laid out, over the course of this conversation, how perilous things are, right? There could be a terrorist attack that could rightly be blamed on, lack of preparation or competency by the people running the FBI or the DIA or whatever.
I mean, Joe Kent is the head of the. He's not confirmed yet, but this is a guy who's got literal ties to white nationalists and neo-Nazis, asked to head up the National Counterterrorism Center. I don't feel great about that. I don't think this guy knows terrorism strategy. So
there could be a Katrina moment with FEMA. We talked about how tax cuts and I don't know, refusing to, insisting on lowering interest rates and tariffs could spur more inflation, cause prices to go up. And there's a whole bunch of things. There could be a measles outbreak that just runs amok that Bobby Kennedy gets tagged for. There's a lot of things that could go wrong, right? And there's just people, even where I live, who are kind of the bedroom community of Washington, D.C. commuters. There's going to be people losing their jobs out here. Now, it's not going to hurt him. He's not going to lose West Virginia, but Trump voters, I'm seeing, some of this I'm sure is not anecdotal. Well, it is anecdotal. Some of it is not, organic. But, you're starting to see videos on Twitter and whatever of people saying, like, I voted for Trump, but I didn't think he would fire me. I'm a veteran, whatever. There's a lot of stuff that Trump's doing that seems politically stupid right now. And so my question is, what does he want? There must be a method to the madness that is it ideological? We have to do all this if we're ever going to do it, and then we'll deal with the consequences later. Is it we're going to, by the time the midterms roll around, we will have co-opted the media and the election system and tilted the playing field to such a degree that we can't be beaten? It's authoritarianism. Like, what's the plan?
Why would you assume there's a method to the madness? Why can't there just be madness? Trump. I mentioned this in the article. There was a story that said Trump was one of the most skilled propagandists of our time. The evidence for that is solely in the space when he is not in power. He was not a skilled propagandist when he was in power. He lost elections when he was in power. He lost the House in 2018. He lost the Senate in 2020. He lost the White House in 2020. When you're not in power, it's a lot easier to be a skilled propagandist. It's a lot easier to anything that's going on that's not good. It's the guy in power. It's his fault. And everything you can create this Democratic boogeyman, DEI, transgender, all that stuff. Anything that you're mad about, you can blame those in power because they care about these other interest groups. They don't care about you.
They, them, not you and me, or whatever that was.
So when you're in power, I just saw a CNN piece recently where they're talking to Trump voters in Colorado. And people who were not regretting their vote necessarily, but were unhappy with what Trump has been doing. Once it is not quite, a binary choice between, Democrats and Trump, and you're sort of looking at Trump in and of himself, even some Trump voters who are not pure cultists are like, I don't really like all this stuff that's going on. And that's why, a Democrat can win a House race more easily because the race becomes a referendum on Trump and Trump's policies, and the individual Democrat is not as relevant, so long as there isn't something really, controversial or striking, on that person's resume. So I mean, I'm not articulating a scenario that is ahistoric or unusual. It's just, I think, more obvious very early in this process because of the scope of I mean, these are radical policies that are being implemented very abruptly, causing lots of disruption and unease. And there's not any indication that there is care about how it's going to affect the midterms. I do not see a method to the madness. They just think that they can bring. I mean, look, if you can scare the majority of the federal workforce out of town, then you can embed a bunch of MAGAites in those positions who will get to stick around for a long time, and maybe they won't get fired so easily because you think you can control the media and you can demonize Democrats going forward. That's a hell of a bet that you
Yeah.
can literally control actually be in an authoritarian environment. The Constitution will not exist, that the judiciary cannot slow your roll, and what you're doing will not be known to the public. I think the evidence is that even you can handpick who's in the White House press pool. It doesn't mean that media doesn't exist still, and what you're doing isn't going to get covered.
Isn't it plausible, though, Democrats take back the House, fairly narrowly, um, in the midterms? Just historically, that's likely to happen. But then, the next presidential election, JD Vance or somebody wins, and partly because there's so much of the country now that, like, even if something really bad happens, a terrorist attack, another, pandemic, inflation, unemployment rates at whatever, 10%, um, half the country, or a big portion of the country, is watching Fox News, and they're going to believe, they're not going to hear the truth. They're going to hear that it was like Joe Biden's fault that inflation is still high 4 years later. Like,
I just
nothing is
don't.
going to persuade. So yes, in a midterm when there's low turnout, Democrats can do well, but in a presidential race, do the facts even matter at
Well,
this
we
point?
had 2020 for Pete's sake. That was one of our highest turnout races ever. I
Biden
don't.
barely won. Biden barely won,
4
despite the fact.
points. Better percentage than Donald Trump had in 2024. One of the highest margins in this era of close elections. You go back, the last 24 years, which is really our era of close elections.
No,
Uh,
but I mean close in terms of weren't there like 3 states where 40 some
yes,
thousand? Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
But uh, I don't see the evidence that the the party in power can easily escape blame when people are frustrated with their economic situation. And I don't see anything going on right now to suggest this is a team that is careful about macroeconomic policies to ensure that things are going to be in a stable, growing fashion at any point in time, come elections were 2026 or 2028. I mean, I maybe the economic cycle lucks out and things aren't so bad in 2028, and Trump can pass the baton. I can only predict that so far. I would just say, if I'm a Republican, I would not feel very confident that that's what's going on here.
Let me ask you about the Dems. I just saw the other day that the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, as we call them in the know, the D-Trip, I think is the nomenclature. They've announced, or according to a story I read, that their solution or their big plan for the midterms is vendor diversity,
Mm-hmm.
which suggests to me they're not taking things quite as seriously as perhaps they might, um, and they're not aware of the zeitgeist. What should Democrats be? Should they? I think Carville said, don't do anything.
Mm-hmm.
Just let Trump's going to fall apart. Stay out of his way. Sit back and let it happen. Other people say, no, you got to be proactive. You should be out there, swinging at every pitch. Are Democrats doing anything? Should they be doing anything? Where they fit into this equation?
Yeah, I mean, there's a certain grain of truth in what Carville is saying, but he said it in an overly simplified, ham-fisted way. Um, I don't think Democrats can literally take a nap. They have to communicate what they stand for and what their values are, but they, by and large, can't stop most of what is happening. They can't stop a budget reconciliation bill. I mean, look, if if they make arguments against the bill and three Republicans break ranks and the bill dies, like Democrats shouldn't vote for it and let the bill happen. They should let the bill die. Um, but and where the Carville logic falls apart, as well as the converse, the fight everything logic falls apart, is there are certain things where Democrats have a certain responsibility, like the debt limit and keeping the government open, that they can't just wash their hands of if they are able to do something that's going to avert real damage to the country. Um, they need to have some principles as they go about doing it. They can't just vote for whatever, but there needs to be some engagement. They you can rightly say they don't control any branch of government, but they're still in the government, and if they have the capacity to avert real harm, they have to try. But I mean, I think it's very reasonable for Democrats to say. So outside the budget reconciliation bill, we have this issue where the government's got to be kept open beyond March 14th, because that's when the last funding bills, have ran out. They did a stopgap bill before it ends on March 14th. Democrats have every reason to say there should be language in this funding bill that says the president has to spend this money. Why should we negotiate with you spending levels if it's meaningless and Donald Trump gets to pick and choose how much we spend? What's the point of this bill then? And I've read some news coverage. Democrats have said that, and some Republicans have said, "Well, that's a non-starter." Well, that's a non-starter. Then screw you. I mean, that's some real baseline stuff here. Congress has power of the purse. If you Republicans are saying that we don't have the power of the purse and Donald Trump controls everything, well, then if that's the way you see the government functioning, then it is on you to keep that kind of government open. Otherwise, if you don't have the votes because you got like 5 people who say Donald Trump doesn't cut enough spending, you got to come to us. Well, that is that standard is different than like a Ted Cruz saying, well, you got to torch Obamacare to keep the government open. You have to defund Planned Parenthood to keep the government open. Those are extraneous demands to the basic challenge of keeping the government open. I don't think Democrats should say, you got to shelve your Medicaid cuts in this other bill for me to vote to keep the government open. I mean, I think Medicaid cuts are unpopular, but you fight that in the bill where it's being proposed. You don't bring that into the government open situation, because that's a way to take your popular position and turn it into an unpopular position. But I think it's totally reasonable to say, I need to vote for a bill where the numbers actually matter. If these numbers don't matter, then what am I doing?
I think Carville said something to the effect of like he's gonna come in there and collapse. He's gonna come in there and collapse within the next month. Is that hyperbole, or do you think that there's going to be a huge to me that seems overwrought? But Carville is basically saying that within a month things are going to like collapse on Trump. What do you make of that?
I mean, it's a little wish casting. I mean, his numbers are going down. I think it's certainly plausible, but and Democrats don't have control about that one way or the other, no matter what posture they take. That if Trump's going to collapse, it's because of stuff that Trump does, not because of things that Democrats do. So I mean, it's an argument for Democrats to not get overly stressed about the precise nature of their resistance. I don't think it follows the Carville where you have to do nothing. You have to literally do nothing because this is going to happen. Like that, I don't think those two points connect.
I've always wanted the job I've always wanted the job where you do nothing, but unfortunately, I don't know if you got that email from Bob Wright that all blogging heads, uh, video vloggers are supposed to send him the 5 things we did this week. So, so anyway, I have to fill out my email and keep our gig. But Bill, I think I'm all out of questions for you, man. How'd I do?
You're fine. Hope I was fine. It's always good to talk to you in these dark times.
Always a pleasure, my friend. Everybody, let me recommend the piece. You go to Washington Monthly. It's called Trump's Historically Bad First Month of Polls Should Terrify Republicans. Bill Scher, always a pleasure.
Good to see you too. Take care.